Yeah, I am happy to welcome you to a special technical kind of talk, which actually fits quite well to the topic of the talk, because it's about virtual reality, and we have the two speakers frozen in time in the corner of this frame, because they pre-recorded the talk from Australia yesterday night or yesterday evening and sent it to us. They had to cancel due to professional reasons their trip to Europe, so they stayed in Australia and luckily pre-recorded the talk so we can look at it now. It takes 27 minutes, so they cut off the question and answers, which is great because they have more time to talk, but on the other hand, you have no time to answer or ask questions. Luckily, I've been involved with them for a while, so maybe I can answer a few questions. Luckily, this is the last talk in this room, so maybe we can extend the time a little. Those two that you can barely see over there are Agnieszka and Prash. Agnieszka Sekula is a scientist with background in biomedical engineering and medical imaging. She's a PhD candidate at the Center of Human Psychopharmacology at Swinburne University in Australia, won several awards as a best speaker. You might see that in the video, and she's really all over the world showing her virtual reality vision of preparing, conducting, and integrating psychedelic experiences with VR. Prash is a medical doctor and former neuropsychiatry fellow at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. He's a clinical advisor to Australian Psychedelic Society, and he is in digital currencies as well, and with Caleb and Brown. He's a bachelor in medicine and a bachelor of surgery and a master in psychology medicine, and those two form a joint venture that is quite successful in bringing in virtual reality in the psychedelic field. As I said, with 3 different apps in preparation during the actual psychedelic experience and in the afterwork, we are working together in the integration part and starting to use their tool called Anchoring VR in the Ovid Clinic as well with patients after the ketamine experience. That is all of the introduction. I'm happy to watch with you Agnieszka Sekula and Prash Puspanathan.
Good afternoon. My name is Prash. I'm a psychiatrist based in Melbourne, Australia.
And I'm Agnieszka, a PhD candidate at Swinburne University in Melbourne, Australia.
And the basis of our research is to study immersive therapeutic frameworks in psychedelic-based treatments. The fundamental rationale behind why we started this work was a consideration that the psychedelic therapy experience hasn't really evolved since the evolution of modern psychedelic therapy, which we date to about 70 years ago. In that time, psychedelic drug development, due to a huge influx in funding predominantly and interest, has grown leaps and bounds, whereas all the other elements that make up the psychedelic therapy process seem to have not evolved to quite the same degree. Now, this may seem like a grand statement, but let's consider that psychedelics, or the use of psychedelics in healing as we used to know it, was a far more unified model when we think of traditional nature immersion models in which they were used. As we have moved to this modern evolution, the clinical evolution of psychedelic therapy, that flow of the process has been disrupted. We now see preparation, dosing, and integration sitting in almost distinct silos. They sit as very drastically different experiences, sometimes differentiated by even setting, and often distinctly differentiated by time. And particularly the preparation and integration sessions are quite distinctly different in terms of their emphasis on talk therapy, psychotherapy, which can be cognitive, analytical, and quite distinctly different from the experiential progress of the actual dosing experience. Our thought is that an experiential immersive medicine, such as psychedelics, need an experiential immersive therapy to fully capitalize on the benefits of the psychedelic experience. Now, existing frameworks find themselves in a situation where the psychedelic experience doesn't fit cleanly into current frameworks of largely cognitive or analytical mental health care delivery. The general approach has been to whittle down in some shape or form the psychedelic experience or the psychedelic therapy experience to fit it into existing therapeutic frameworks, whether that's adapting the psychotherapy process to fit existing frameworks of psychotherapy, or whether that's whittling down the setting to fit into existing care pathways, which the clinical system is much more adept at. Whereas our thought was that instead of whittling down the psychedelic experience, the experiential experience, that we should be adapting the existing mental health care delivery framework to fit more cleanly around the psychedelic experience. And distinctly, our thought is that technology can be an excellent way to do so. Some of the facets that we were looking to target involve the insights that are generated by the psychedelic experience. We know that the insights generated are really at the core of what makes psychedelic therapy so beneficial, so insightful, so profound. Yet it felt like not enough innovation and not enough research was going into exactly how we would maximize the potential of the insights that emerged during the psychedelic experience. We know that these insights fade over time, and that integration, unfortunately, happens over time. And so we decided that we wanted to focus on creating a methodology by which we would be able to maintain the profundity, the freshness, and the quality of those insights for as long as possible throughout the therapy journey. Another target for us was extended integration. Now, we understand that the integration process or extended integration process is expensive, it's hugely resource intensive, and as a result, not everyone can either afford it, certainly not every clinical trial is able to afford it, and that there is often a point where termination occurs and the patient is left feeling like they haven't had enough time with their therapist to formally integrate that experience. Now, they can go to their own therapist to continue integration, but that therapist hasn't been present through the dosing process and through those pivotal first few integration sessions. Now, what if we could create this psychedelic memory library that creates a transferable package of data, of raw qualitative data, that the patient is able to take with them to any therapist to pick up where that formal integration left off? We asked ourselves what we could do to maximize that which we considered the key component of the entire psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy process, which was the insights that were generated by the psychedelic session. And what could we do to maximize the processing of those insights? And there were three different targets that we identified, or pain points. The first was an over-reliance on cognitively heavy processes of talk therapy or psychotherapy to process the experience, and an inability to, or which may have caused an inability to, one, retain the insights, and also to communicate them henceforth, whether that was to therapists, to family members, or even to oneself. And the solution we thought to identify was a means of prioritizing the altered state experience above all else, and instead creating therapeutic frameworks to fit around it, rather than chipping away at the altered state experience to fit into existing therapy frameworks. The second target was the patient-therapist hierarchy, and attempting to disrupt a hierarchical relationship, so as to ensure that the therapist was, in effect, a visitor in the patient's therapeutic journey as much as they were a guide. And secondly, to reduce the patient's anxiety around surrendering to the psychedelic experience that was to come. And in doing so, we aimed to increase a sense of empowerment, to allow patients to be in greater control over their healing pathway, their mindset, and their setting. And the third pain point was the siloed nature of the individual sessions within the psychedelic therapy journey. So preparation, dosing, integration, which, as we described earlier, are often separated by time and sometimes space, and which resulted in an incoherence between the different phases of treatment. And in doing so, if we were to counter that, to establish a sense of permanence and coherence throughout the entire psychedelic therapy process.
And the rest of our research has focused on searching for the methods that we can utilize in order to maximize those three components that Prash has mentioned. In doing so, we have identified immersive technology as one of the methods that we could leverage to make sure that we prioritize the experience, that we ensure the sense of empowerment, and maintain that sense of permanence in treatment. And in the rest of our talk, we will present you the rationale behind why we believe that virtual reality might be a good candidate to moderate psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, focusing on those three principles. Firstly, if we look at the experience, we know that practicing altered states of consciousness means that we can go deeper into them and that we can make the most out of them. We can see that in research on mindfulness meditators who, the more experience they have with mindfulness, the deeper they can go into an altered state of consciousness with their psychedelic experience. A similar pattern is explored by high-performing teams such as the Navy SEALs, who are practicing different forms of altering state of consciousness, such as meditation, sensory deprivation, or trance, in order to learn how to enter that state when they're on their mission. We know that VR is capable of eliciting an altered state of consciousness. There is new research that is suggesting that VR can be used for that. But more importantly, virtual reality have been shown to successfully facilitate other state-altering experiences, such as meditation, and doing so in a way that is very reliable and predictable. Secondly, an important part of the psychedelic experience is based in the capacity to maintain a mindful presence that helps patients to surrender more to the experience and to be more present throughout the entire duration of it. We know that combining a mindful state of presence with psilocybin means that patients can go deeper into their altered state experience. And we know that VR can enable anyone to go into a mindful state a little bit easier than without any support. VR is one of the most reliable ways of inducing a mindful presence, and it can lead to a whole range of exploration of the depth of mindfulness that without any additional supports, patients might struggle to do. Lastly, in relation to experience, we have seen that combining different state-altering practices can lead to augmenting the peak states. This has been explored in a whole range of different research projects, for example, using LSD in combination with sensory deprivation, using psilocybin in combination with mindfulness, or using datura plant in trance dance practices. We know that virtual reality and psychedelics have some of the shared mechanisms that are involved in inducing altered states or peak states, such as ineffability, the loss of sense of space and time, the disconnection to one's body and all the other reference systems, and the so-called slow simmer awe, which is very different to, for example, a quick boiled awe, which is more immediate, but rather, the slow simmer awe requires this slow buildup of the sense of awe, but that also lasts longer and is a little bit more destabilizing in ways that can be both positive and negative. The second principle that was of importance to us was the sense of empowerment. If we consider most therapeutic scenarios, it is usually the patient who is the visitor in the therapist space. So they become the guest in someone else's environment. That creates a little bit of a sense of hierarchy or distance from that ownership of over the environment that is of high importance to the patient, because their entire healing takes place in that space. What we find important is that virtual reality is under full control of the client. The user can modulate and change all the components of the virtual reality space. And they can do that with the whole range of expressions and with the whole range of processes that allow the control over the whole richness of stimuli. That stimuli is very often used as an input, which is something that's projected onto the user. So it could be a personalized experience that the patient goes through within the VR space. But it also includes the output, something that the user himself is generating within the VR space. A very important aspect of virtual reality for us is the ability to buffer the client from everything that is happening around them. If we think about the regular setup for therapy, it usually takes place in that very comfortable living room-like environment, which can be very comfortable for some patients, maybe not for all, but most importantly, it contains all those familiar elements that are tethering the patient to their sort of day-to-day reality. We believe that it might not be an ideal setting for a lot of clients, and rather want to detach them from what they are normally focusing on and make sure that they're only focusing on what's right in front of them, which is their healing pathway. So through enabling patients to have an unlimited level of expression through the whole range of expressive tools, we engage them in generating their own healing environment, which we think will lead to an increased sense of empowerment. And lastly, the sense of permanence. We see a very high level of satisfaction among the users of virtual reality-based programs, which might be behind very high levels of adherence to those programs, which does mean that patients are more likely to stick with their practice or with their homework if it's part of their healing process. And secondly, the virtual reality scenarios, and especially the outputs that patients are generating, can be built over time, can constantly grow together with the patient, and be developed inside out between the patient and the therapist. They are very likely to be continued because they're also not just an immersive scenario, but they're also very engaging, and in a lot of ways turn that therapy into an experience. And before we tell you how we turned all those principles into our own VR scenarios, we have to mention the whole range of limitations and side effects that could be a part of virtual reality-based treatments. Most importantly, these include the potential for cyber sickness and physical discomfort, as well as overstimulation and accidental exposure. These are predominantly related to the type of content that is being produced, which includes movement, especially controller-based movement rather than the natural movement around the space. The use of very stimulating sensory projections, or using elements that could evoke memories or trigger memories and responses that we would like to avoid. So this informs the type of content that should be included as we develop scenarios that are healing. Secondly, there's the potential for distraction and for overly leading the experience, and that is more related to the timing of applying the virtual reality scenario. So for example, of course, if we apply it right before an altered state experience or during it, we can distract from what is the most important, and we can lead the experience in ways that the patient might not want to be led. And the last thing is the resource limitation and commercial interests, which are more at the sort of systemic level. related to, for example, the fact that a lot of the VR scenarios are being developed by companies that are focused more on gaming or have experience in gaming. And they might be driven by slightly different priorities than if clinicians or scientists are developing those scenarios. And resource limitation relates predominantly, obviously, to financial limitations that need to be implemented or that need to be put into introducing new technology to any practice, but also attentional limitations. So virtual reality should be used only together with therapists who are very familiar with this technology, and for patients who can find it very easy to operate the system rather than needing to learn it from scratch during therapy.
I'd like to introduce you to our VR scenario that we have designed, which we call Anchoring VR. And the purpose of Anchoring VR is to produce a liminal third space that sort of sits between normal conscious state and the altered state of consciousness that is generated in the psychedelic experience, to create a liminal zone in which the user is able to project onto and act as a transition zone between the different states of consciousness that a user can always return back to be able to access and to anchor the psychedelic insights that are stored within it. The first time that a user is exposed to the Anchoring VR scenario is at the tail end of a psychedelic dosing session. You see here, post-peak, in that first narrative zone, the user using the little stars in the VR landscape as recording devices in which they're able to record in their own voice the insights that have just emerged from them in the dosing session as they remain fresh, ripe, and containing all of the emotion that would have been generated in the dosing session. They're also able to utilize visual expression tools to convey some of the symbolism, which is often quite rife in the psychedelic dosing session. Time that a user returns to the VR landscape is in the first integration sessions, where they listen back to those insights that they have recorded in their own voice and then start to organize their thoughts and organize them according to the themes that may emerge during the integration session. And they're able to group them according to the themes that emerge in the relationship and in the dynamic and interaction with their therapists. They're also able to turn some of those insights that were recorded into particular symbolic actions. In this case, perhaps an insight about that was to be nurtured, a behavior change, for example, that was to be nurtured throughout therapy could be turned into a plant, which as they progress through therapy and act on it, can continue to be nurtured and allowed to grow, while that symbol also acts as an ongoing, continuous, objective record of their progress through therapy. And we see here, as they progress through the therapy journey, and as their insights are recorded, organized, we see them start to map out on this liminal 3D space an image of their evolving psyche displayed in a third space external to them, rather than where it usually sits, which is within their psychological state.
We have used Anchoring VR in a case study that we have done together with Psychedelic Society Belgium at a Psilocybin retreat that they run in the Netherlands. The retreat lasts 2 days, includes 1 hour of preparation, 1 dosing session with psilocybin truffles, and then 1 full day of integration, which is a regular schedule for the retreat. And what we have done is we've provided them with 2 VR models, Anchoring VR and a Control VR, which is a mystical type experience that is supposed to evoke a similar state to what psychedelic experience would feel like. And those VR scenarios were used by the retreat facilitator together with 4 healthy volunteers who decided to enroll in the study. This is the basic study design that we use. So as I said, there was a preparation session, the dosing session that ran as per regular with no interruptions from our side. And then the anchoring VR was delivered towards the end of each participant's experience. And that was at participants' request. They were instructed to let us know when they were ready for the VR. And that would have been at the end of the experience when they are just coming out of this. So not hours afterwards, but also not at all during the peak phase. Basically, whenever they felt that they were ready to express themselves in some form, and in the time that they would have normally used for that first narrative. We have looked at two main questionnaires, which is the state mindfulness scale and the VR-induced affect checklist, which is adapted from Geneva Music induced affect checklist. And we are looking at the level to which anchoring VR could store the insights that emerged during that psychedelic session and then re-evoke them during the second day. And that second day, you see on the integration side, which used first control VR to control for the effects of anchoring VR, and then anchoring VR that looked at the exact same set of questionnaires. At the end of the retreat, we also looked at the outcome measures, which include measures of acceptability, appropriateness, and feasibility, as well as some open-ended questions with the participants. Here you can see the outcomes of the 3 outcome measures, acceptability, appropriateness, and feasibility, which are scoring very high. And some of the examples of the accounts that the participants provided us with. On the left, you can see mostly the interview questions that relate to being able to remember at a more psychological level the experience. So that was mostly around just an open-ended question of how does the VR make you feel? And the participants seem to speak about the fact that anchoring VR reminded them of the memories that they had, even when they thought that they remembered most of it, but they actually realized by going through the VR experience that they haven't memorized what they thought they memorized. And so this was that reminder of the content of the experience. But on the other hand, and on the right-hand side, you can see that there was also the reminder of the actual emotional component of it, of the experience. So feeling something ineffable and feeling of knowing, being able to be reminded of the magic vision, which is the psychedelic experience. And lastly, which relates more to the mind mapping component of our VR scenario, participants were speaking about it, helping them to come in touch with thoughts and feelings and to sort out the differences between the thoughts and feelings and to structure their mind. And as for the main questionnaires that we used, what we are looking at was the similarity between what anchoring VR evoked and what kind of feelings were evoked immediately after the psychedelic experience. So that comes from that presumption that if we are able to anchor patients in what their psychedelic experience felt like, we might be able to integrate that experience better. So on the left-hand side, you can see the state mindfulness scale, which kind of speaks about the level of introspection that the participant is able to achieve. And in the dark pink is the psychedelic experience, and the light pink is our anchoring VR scenario. The gray serves as a control to show you how to compare anchoring and the psychedelic experience. You can see that the level of matching between what participants felt after anchoring and after psychedelic session is very close for the state mindfulness of the mind, much less so for the state mindfulness of the body, which is quite predictable given that we have not used any of the tactile elements in the VR experience. Similarly, for the VR-induced affect checklist, which looks at different emotions that are experienced, again, we weren't as interested in the exact emotions that were evoked, but rather the level to which anchoring VR matched onto a psychedelic experience. And again, here you can see quite a high level of correlation between those two experiences, which is very different for what participants reported after going through control VR. we would like to express our gratitude to all our advisors, medical advisors and research advisors. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us and we'd be happy to engage in a conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything
Engage in a conversation with you.
Is there anything that you would ask about the app? I had tried it several times. It's fun. It is immersive. It's really calming as well. I haven't tried it with psychedelics though. It's just like live, and we have not tried it on patients yet in the OV clinic, but we plan to. Is there anything? Yes, please. Ist noch ein Mikrofon da?
Yeah, I personally think this is a brilliant idea with the VR, and I'm wondering, as a therapist, how does it look for you to be sitting next to the person who is going through the process? How does it differ from the normal setting?
Yeah, like you might have seen down there with the VR settings, what I see as a patient is streamed to a two-dimensional computer screen. So the therapist can sit there and can actually with this also interact. For example, the patient can create the stars themselves with a certain hand gesture, but if they don't really feel like it or so, also the therapist can create them just with a mouse and just click like create 3 new stars, and then the patient just grabs them, records them or something like that. Also the therapist can interact with the things. For example, the type a name, what we just saw, like a bubble with like saying home. This is quite difficult with the controller and quite strenuous, but the therapist can just type on the keyboard. So if the patient says something like, oh, I want to name this bubble home, then the therapist can easily do it. And because of the most headsets don't have like necessarily headphones, but have it strapped in close to the ear, it's really easy also to interact in virtual reality with a therapist, and they can still easily talk and talk about what happens there, and the therapist sees everything that the patient sees, and when the patient moves, the therapist sees the same view.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, just a remark. I'm still very skeptical about it because, like, what is shown is that we rise screen time and reduce human-to-human interaction time in a world where actually alienation is a big topic. And when I see that at the end, a motivated person plants a tree in a VR setting, then I feel like, why don't you go out and plant it and dig it into the soil where it's needed, and you have this earth-to-earth or human-to-human connection. So I'm really skeptical about it still.
Yeah, I think it's about strong symbolism, and also we talk in integration therapy, we talk about the 5 modalities: remembering, structuring, exploring, and so on. And those are really empowered through this system because this is easily revisitable, not only in a therapy session, but also at home. And if I think of like the broad variety that happens during a psychedelic experience, I can't write all that down. And this is not as emotional as my own recorded voice. And really being in that space, I would actually love to have my whole therapeutic process in like a huge 3-dimensional mind map where I could go to the home thing and listen to, oh yeah, it felt like home, something like that. My own voice telling me that. It is a multisensory experience that actually could add to my revisiting of those experiences. At least that's what I thought. Of course, no one holds you back to plant a tree outside, but to have the feeling of, I mean, that happens during therapy sessions, right? That the therapist would say something like, oh, we're at this point again. Remember last time we talked about this? This is kind of watering a plant, watering that thought of this was helpful to you, remember? And doing that virtually by grabbing a drop of water and putting it into a plant has like a multi-sensory experience to it that could be helpful. We don't know yet. And this is just like a try how this could work. And obviously that involves more screen time, but also it's not a whole therapy session in there, but you could just like revisit those things from time to time, and that's what they want to show with that curve. So from time to time you revisit that three-dimensional mind map, add something, change something. You could add another sentence to your mother or something like that, and to the star that represents your mother. And this could be helpful. Of course, there's just like a preliminary research, and we haven't tried it that much with the patients as well, but I think it could be a chance as well to counter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Milan.
Yeah, I was just wondering why you're like on the trip, like isn't it like way too artificial to watch in a VR? I mean, maybe for me it feels like it's nothing that you really want to do while tripping, like watching in something which is human-made, kind of like, that's my experience. So is there any feedback on that, how they reacted on that? Or?
To my knowledge, I have no knowledge about this kind of feedback. When I tried it sober, I had the feeling it was quite a nice beach where you could just like, if I imagine I sit in a comfy chair, I would like to spend some time in there, especially because I have the feeling of being really in an intimate space, because I feel like I'm alone with myself, just with a therapist as a voice somewhere. And this could also be, obviously it's the same when I'm like in a beautiful therapy room and talk to someone. This can be an intimate space too, but I had the feeling of sitting in a nice place and just like having time and intimate space to reflect upon myself. I think it's also highly individual from patient to patient. If you feel like, why am I doing this? Obviously, then you shouldn't do it. But if you like to have that idea of structuring, remembering things, recording things, and obviously in the therapy process, if you revisit that time after time in each session, you get familiar with it. And then after a while, maybe there's a sense of, I'm here again. Okay, that's nice. Instead of like, oh, I don't want to be here. So I think that is also a process that happens in that virtual world. Yeah. Fabian?
I think it could be really interesting to structure the mind. What I was wondering, is it possible to bring this app on your phone, or do I have to put on this VR mask all the time?
In the moment, it's quite CPU intensive. So you need not only a very good computer, but also a certain headset to use that. It is planned to transport this mind map on your phone or something like that, because then you could easily put it in like Google Cardboard glasses and take it home. This is not implemented yet, but they plan to do so. And I think that is the main valuable part. So because if you can just visit this three-dimensional mind map in the therapy lesson, you might lose some way of like interacting with it from time to time, adding maybe an insight that you suddenly had while taking a bath or something. I think it would be very helpful to be able to transport it in your pocket, but that hasn't been implemented yet, to my knowledge.
Yeah. I think that would be the main benefit of having it, to have my thoughts in my pocket and consistently adding new thoughts, or
And then obviously not only to a psychedelic experience, but like a Miro board or something that you just like a three-dimensional Miro board that you can access all the time to just like collect ideas. Then it's detached from the psychedelic experience. Maybe that's why it's not developed yet, also because then it's a different purpose. But in a therapeutic framework, I think it does make sense to visit it with a therapist and to form connections in that. All right. If that's it, thank you for your attention.